Welcome to the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. I'm your host, FoodTech marketing expert Megan Thomas. FoodTech Stories features the leaders pioneering new approaches to technology, collaboration, and storytelling in the food tech and ag tech space. Food and agricultural changing, and fresh ideas and leadership are needed to sustainably feed the growing global population. Join us every other week as we talk to a founder, operator, or visionary in food and agriculture. I'm honored to have Milton Stokes here today. Milton is the Senior Director of Food Nutrition for the International Food and Information Council. And Milton has worked throughout his career in food-related communications and really working to bring people together around important nutritional and food-related topics. So Milton, welcome to the podcast.
Megan, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. Happy to talk with you.
Let's dive right in. Can you describe the work of the organization you work for?
So earlier this year, January 1st, I joined the International Food Information Council, or most people call it IFIC. IFIC is the nonprofit 501c3 organization. We focus on performing research with consumers to measure knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs about food, nutrition, health, and sustainability. And then from that research, we create educational content, mostly geared toward health professionals such as dietitians, but broadly health professionals, as well as academics, food nutrition scientists, even policy folks consume our content. We're known as the people who capture the consumer perspective. There's a lot of organizations talking about food, nutrition, and health, but not so many are actually talking with consumers and learning from consumers. And so that's the role that we play. IFIC is a membership organization, and we have members from food industry, beverage, and agricultural space. Our board is mostly academics from colleges and universities. So think nutrition scientists, food scientists. Our governance includes a third part of representatives from the USDA, EPA, and FDA. So IFIC is the three-part organization. That's our model. Our mission is science communication, and our vision is one where science is informing food decisions. So that's a little bit about IFIC.
Thank you for breaking that down. That was very, very clear. So how do you contribute to that work?
I am a dietitian and a communicator, and the work that I do focuses on two main areas. Our members can also then join committees that are focused on topics. And so we have a variety of committees. There are two committees that comprise nutrition. I'm the staff lead for those committees. And then we have another focus of work or pillar around science communication, which I mentioned is our mission. And so I'm leading the science communication platform.
Can you give an example of how you would work in the area of science communication with different collaboration partners?
IFIC has this special project that looks specifically at science communication, and our members are supporting the project because they believe in our mission. We just recognize that there's a lot of inaccurate information in the food, nutrition, health space. The environment is really congested. You can find information, good or bad, about any topic, but especially when it comes to food, agriculture, sustainability, nutrition. Our members were interested in trying to help bring clarity and credibility to that space. And we published a science communication guidance document earlier this year. We published it on National Science Appreciation Day back in March, and that's available on our website, foodinsight.org. It's a really comprehensive document that helps explain how knowledge happens. It explains what types of research methods scientists and researchers use to answer research questions and or test hypotheses, and then what kind of conclusions come from those different methods, and then how should communicators communicate the findings and put them into appropriate context. Everyone knows there's always a new study that found this or a new study that said that. Often those are taken out of context. It doesn't consider what the body of evidence says, especially when it comes to nutrition, health, and food. Our work is about helping communicators understand how science happens and how to communicate about it. So we've created that guidance document, and we're now going to be working on companion pieces, an online content hub, infographics, presentation, and a lot of other resources that can help bring clarity and credibility to communication.
That sounds like a wonderful resource. I'll have to check that out. When you think about consumers in general, and I appreciate that consumers are different, do you see any general trends in terms of either scientific or food literacy or how the two intersect?
I'm seeing consumers are just really more interested in this space, and they're curating social media feeds. They're looking for news. They're trying to find answers to these questions. They are reading beyond the headlines for the most part. And some of our work has shown us that, yes, consumers do feel confused by what feels like is a nearly constant shifting landscape. It's almost like consumers think scientists and policy people can't make up their mind. Like, what's the healthy diet? It seems like things are always changing. Science isn't an endpoint necessarily. It's a process. It's an evolution. How do you put this finding in the context of what else is known and then help consumers take action on that? Maybe while we're trying to debate the pros and cons of something, that family still has to put dinner on the table tonight. So they can't wait for us to figure it all out. They want us to get it figured out, and they want us to stop changing our minds, but it really is a process and an evolution. I do think consumers are deeply interested in that, and I think they are searching for content, and I'm really happy to point them to resources at IFIC, foodinsight.org, for example, because we do have a lot of evidence-based information around nutrients and food and health.
Do you see generally, are consumers seeking nutrition? I hear that thrown about as if consumers are seeking nutrition, they want healthy choices. But if you look at the data about consumption, that doesn't always sync up. So how do you think about what consumers are looking for when they're looking for products and types of foods that have specific nutrition benefits?
Everyone loves talking about nutrition and nutrients, and everyone loves to say, oh, I'm trying to get more of this vitamin or that mineral or this macronutrient. I'm a dietitian. I love it. Talk to somebody one-on-one and you ask them, okay, what did you eat last night? And why did you make that decision? No one ever says because it had vitamin D. That's why I cooked this thing or that. They say because of taste. And the second thing that they will say, and our research backs this up, it's because of price. Nothing trumps those two characteristics when it comes to making food decisions. I can't blame consumers. I want to like the food that I'm choosing. So of course, taste is number one. And I want to be able to pay for it, just like everybody else. So nothing trumps taste and price. That doesn't mean I think nutrition is unimportant or we shouldn't try to focus on that or healthfulness overall. What our research has shown that is as income increases, there are some additional, I'll say some reprioritization around things like convenience and healthfulness. But for 19 years, we've done this, IFIC's done a food and health survey. And we ask, what drives your decisions, and it's taste and price. If you want to talk a little bit about nutrition and nutrients, we do dig into that in the survey. And we ask people, if you're following a diet or a meal plan, what kind of diet is it? Most people tell us it's high protein. There's tons of content online geared toward consumers and just in media in general about make sure you get enough protein. It helps you to feel fuller longer so you don't overeat. It can help you manage your weight. And I'm pro protein. I love protein. I want to get protein as part of all my meals and snacks if I can. But that's the number one diet. So consumers love protein. They're trying to stay away from sodium and saturated fat. So that's just a little snapshot of some of the findings.
Taste and price. And if you're making a meal, probably prep time comes in there as well. And kind of what can I do with it?
Can I get it on the table in time before my kids raid the snack cabinet or start eating up other things? And then it's like,
Absolutely. And so I appreciate that as a foundation. It's important to keep that in mind. If we are speaking about nutrition, maybe a company or a product or a type of food that's been looking to differentiate through nutrition, can you think of an example of one of those who's done a good job of articulating meaningful nutritional benefits to consumers?
Organizations that represent, let's say, meat or oils or grains or vegetables. Commodities for getting it right in my book, because everything they do is evidence-based. A commodity can't, and you probably know this, they can't go out and say whatever they want about wellness or something well-being. They have to talk from the science, and what they want to say is approved by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So there's lots of controls and checks and balances in place. Yes, of course, they want to promote, the producers are producing, but they're linking nutrition and the science up all together. And so as a dietitian, I find that really heartening. And I think it's great for consumers because they should know that they can trust what they're hearing and learning and seeing from a commodity board.
So I know you've looked at IFIC, you've looked at consumer behavior, attitudes across a host of different food and science related topics. So I'd like to dig into some of those in a more discrete way. You talked a bit about high protein, which makes a lot of sense. Are there other nutritional benefits or nutrients, even eating styles? Those are two different things, but that you're seeing consumers gravitating toward, or you're starting to see some increased interest in? I think anything that seems to be emerging at this time would be interesting to know.
Yeah. So what's emerging, and it's been emerging, but I think keeps growing, is this idea of, so we mentioned protein, but seeing mindfulness and mindful eating take off. That's something that's increased in popularity. And I think that makes sense. And I actually love seeing it. We talk about taste and enjoyment of food and flavor. So if you're mindful, you're present, you're enjoying what you're having, you're not multitasking, you're not working, you're not having a working lunch, you're having a lunch. You're having a dinner with your family, or, a dinner like that where you're focusing on, it might be attributed to the movement around health at every size. We don't have research that confirms that, so I'm just sort of speculating here. But there's been a lot of pushback from consumers and others that everyone doesn't have to have a perfect BMI. Everyone doesn't have to have a perfect weight. You can be in a bigger body and still be physically fit and still have great blood lipids, and your blood pressure can still be good. So as long as you're healthy and you're eating your fruits and vegetables and exercising, the idea of everyone having the same kind of shape or, BMI less than a certain number, that's being challenged more and more. And so as that's increased, maybe mindfulness has increased. I'm not sure if that's true. It's just more of a speculation. Regardless, I've enjoyed seeing mindfulness on the rise from a diet perspective. I'll tell you, opposite of that is we saw from our research, paleo diet was the least popular. Down at the bottom, vegan, vegetarianism, and plant-based, which I found to be really surprising. I eat a wide variety of foods in my diet. I'm not vegetarian or vegan, but I would think that it wouldn't be so low on the list, just because there is a ton of content trying to promote increasing fruits and vegetables and increased eating of plant foods. And maybe it's a reflection, I've just thought about this for a little bit, and maybe it's a reflection of people don't really know what is plant-based. Do they think it's the same as veganism? Do they think it's the same as vegetarianism? And so maybe that's why it just didn't do so well on our survey.
People are often surprised to see just how low the percentages are for vegetarian and vegan eating. I also think sometimes people believe that if you're following a vegetarian lifestyle, you're eating primarily vegetables, which is not the case.
Agreed.
And there are many types of unhealthy foods that are vegan or contain no animal products. And so doesn't mean they're good for you or providing you with nutritional benefits that you need to be healthy.
Well, totally agreed. Nearly nobody in this country gets enough fruits and vegetables. So if we could start by adding one at each meal and maybe one at a snack, we'll get closer. Dairy, whole grains. So those are some of the top underconsumed food groups. If we could move people to more like the My Plate graphic, which is the visual representation of these dietary guidelines, and you can find that at myplate.gov. If we can get people to that image, which, you can see it, half the plate's fruits and vegetables. Then there's a serving of dairy there, and then there's 25% of a protein, and there's 25% of a healthy carb. That's sort of an ideal breakdown. We don't have to really worry too much about measuring food and weighing food and obsessing over calories. If we could just get those proportions, we'd be like 95% there.
But as we know, changing behavior is very difficult.
Is it? No, I'm just kidding.
Have you heard? Every school child knows that what they should, fruits and vegetables are good for them. And yet so few, especially adults, so few adults eat the RDA of those types of foods. So such an opportunity to change that. So kind of digging on that, I want to shift into food tech foods, however they may be defined, are something that's of interest, that fields of interest to folks who listen to the podcast. When you look at the body of work that you've done, and actually plant-based eating might be a great segue into that, what are one or two opportunities in that food tech food space that you would like to see producers address?
So I love this question because it's almost like, if you put me in charge, what will we do?
Right, exactly.
That's what I'm hearing. The power is going to my head, Megan. I'm a dietitian. Diet quality is really not great in this country. We're failing. It's like 58 out of 100 for the healthy eating index. We've basically got nowhere to go but up. Any little change we can make will benefit. And I mentioned earlier that they're under consumed food groups, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, dairy. What can we do to remove barriers to fruit and vegetable consumption. If I could wave my magic wand, like we would check as many boxes on consumer traits as possible. So I spent a decade working in agriculture, and a lot of that work that I was part of was geared toward agronomic traits, was geared toward performance for the grower, which is super important because that has lots of implications along the chain and for consumers included. But when it comes to what you can see in the produce section, what you can see in your own refrigerator, on your countertop, if we can up the consumer traits, so a berry that is a little more shelf stable, you can ship it, it's going to not be damaged and when it's bounced around, and maybe one that doesn't mold so quickly or grow mold and tastes good. So I want like everything is what I'm telling you. Now, is that possible? I don't know. I've seen in the space melons that have been bred to be more shelf stable, but there are trade-offs. What does that look like? Well, the melon can last a lot longer, but when you cut into it, does the consumer even want to eat it? What's the taste? Yeah, you can have the melon that lasts, but it's not sweet. I don't know where things stand in that space, but if we could get shelf stability, shippability, everything performance related, including the taste and flavor, that's what I would love to have.
Yes. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about in terms of taste and price. You don't always get those things when you get some of these other consumer facing product features. So kind of shifting gears in the research that I've read or conducted working with different brands and types of food products is that millennials and Gen Z, who are just really, in their coming of age and in their early 20s, are very, very different in terms of the way they get information and often the features and benefits of the products that they are looking for. Are you seeing that in the data that you have gathered? And if so, could you share some insights around it?
Some of the things that we know from the Food and Health Survey, for example, is that millennials, they're more familiar with dietary guidelines. And so that's the National Dietary Guidance. Maybe they're more familiar because of education or because of the media around it. We don't really get into the why in our survey. But Gen Z, they're actually more familiar with the My Plate graphic. So that visualization of what healthy eating looks like. And perhaps that could be because it was part of the health classes, part of their, schooling. Whereas older generations, my generation and up, might be more familiar with like the food pyramid, which is no longer used, right? And a lot of people still think we have the food pyramid as the graphic. So there's some differences there. When it comes to benefits from food, which is something that you'd asked about, we see across the generations, we see that everyone is looking for more energy and to have less fatigue, with the exception of boomers. Boomers, according to our research, they're looking for benefits around healthy aging. I think that makes sense. Everybody could be / should be thinking about healthy aging, or it is top of mind for that generation. We had an item where we asked people if they'd rather take a medication for a health condition, instead of changing their lifestyle. Gen Z, they tended to tell us that they would take the medication rather than making a change, whereas fewer Gen X and boomers said that. The Gen X and boomers said they would make a lifestyle change. And I was thinking, well, I wonder what that is. I'm Gen X, and maybe it's because the older generations are already taking more medications than they want, so they don't want to take another one. I'm not sure. But the takeaway is like, not everybody wants to take another pill or a pill. Some groups are more likely to do a lifestyle change. And then another one that comes to mind is that when we think about information seeking, younger generations, they told us that they're more likely to see food and nutrition content in their social media, and they're more likely to trust it.
Yeah, all these insights to kind of pull apart, right, and understand what's underneath them. So you mentioned that you guys had looked at snacking specifically in one of your recent research efforts. Were there any surprising takeaways from that work?
Yeah, from the Food and Health Survey, we're learning that snacking is has emerged as sort of its own meal pattern. A lot of people, about 75% of people are snacking at least once a day, but a good number of people are actually replacing a traditional meal with a snack at least once a day. That was something that stood out for me. In the snacking research universe, there's some debate and not a lot of consistency with what is the definition of the term snack. Believe it or not, that's like a kind of a contesting term. But we ask consumers, okay, if you eat or drink between a meal, what do you call it? They call it a snack. So 9 out of 10 consumers call snacking. At least in their eyes, that's what they think of it. And what are they looking for? They're looking for something that's sweet, then salty and crunchy. And when it comes to food groups, the food group that they like the most is fruit, which makes sense. If they want sweet, fruit tends to be on the kitchen counter, in a fruit bowl for a lot of households. Fruit, you don't have to really do that much to it. If it's a banana, for example, or an apple, grab it and go. Sweet is something that's on their minds. We asked them if they plan their snacks or if they do it spontaneously, and 2 out of 3 are spontaneous snackers. So just kind of on the go and spur of the moment, whatever they're thinking of. To me, in my mind, that connects back to why fruit is so popular and maybe why sweet is so popular, because fruit is convenient. It's portable. It's right there. So it can fulfill that grab and go type of mentality. Then the last thing I'll tell you that stood out to me about snacking is as the day progresses, the healthfulness of snacks tends to go down. So the morning snack is reported as the healthiest. It's also the time when fewer people are snacking, but by the time they get to late night, it's sort of like the Wild West. People are snacking for, are they bored? Are they stressed out? Are they trying to distract themselves? Is it an anxiety? Who knows? We saw that pattern, and it probably is what happens with overall dietary intake anyway. I did my own casual literature search to try to see if I could make a comparison over a single day, what tends to happen. I can tell you it's what happens in my own life, in my own household. Breakfast, we got it together. Then by the time in the evening, late night rolls around, it's like, well, okay.
We have the best of intentions. I think it's very intuitive, but when you think about food consumption and healthy eating, it's a really important insight to figure out how to address that in a meaningful way. So as a registered dietitian, what opportunities do you see for brands and registered dietitians to work together?
Registered dietitians with the science-based education, credentials and training could be called upon to help companies focus their message, and a message that's around the evidence and around the science, yes, but also around values. I think dietitians can help bring those two together. Nobody wants to hear a bunch of boring facts all the time. Values tend to be what connects us. It's what people sort of see themselves when a company starts to talk about their values. Oh, yeah, I can see myself in that company. I can see myself in that brand. Let's unite the two. Let's find a way, and dietitians can do this, to bring science together with values in the communication. That's something that I'd love. And, I mentioned my organization, IFIC. We have a number of dietitians on staff, and our mission is science communication. There are other groups doing this, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and then the American Society for Nutrition, for example. If we can marry evidence with values, I think we could really help consumers in terms of shifting their diet quality.
It's very insightful. I love that approach. So how about academics? Do you see academics intersecting with brands and RDs?
Yes. So we see that at IFIC for sure. And I've seen that throughout my career. I used to be a professor myself in nutrition. That's the folks who are training the future healthcare professionals, including dietitians. So I think we're all in this together. And that's why I really love the work that we do with the American Society for Nutrition, because that's where nutrition scientists, and many of them are academics, they're scientists at universities or in government or with industry. Academics are under a lot of pressure to get funding for their research, perform their research, and then publish, and just over and over and over, keep going. That tends to be the model for promotion and tenure at a lot of the institutions. We could debate the pros and cons of that, but I feel like that's a separate podcast. What they don't really have a lot of time to do is talk about their findings, to talk about their research. Who's doing it? Well, it might be a PR team at a university, and they're doing the best they can, but are they getting all the nuances? Are they getting the limitations of the research? Are they talking about who the findings actually generalize to and who they don't? Because of all the pressures that are in the system, academics aren't really doing all the communication that they could, and we can support them better. And I know IFIC is working on that with the American Society for Nutrition.
Yes, it seems like an opportunity. And I think in many areas, what worked maybe for a generation, some of those techniques still work, but some of them don't work any longer, just given the proliferation of digital communication and how consumers today are informed, how much information comes at them in any given day. In closing, when we look to the future, let's say the next 3 to 5 years, kind of on the horizon for consumer food choices, what are kind of 1 or 2 things that you see emerging in the field that you work in?
couple of things that are on my radar is the work that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration is focused on around voluntary sodium reduction. So there's already been some progress made. Most Americans, we eat too much sodium or salt, and it's really widely distributed in the food supply. It's even in places where you might not expect it to be, like bread or even cow's milk is naturally in there. Processed food, and then we add salt when we cook and when we eat. So it's a big part of our culture. It's a big part of our food supply. It's also a big part of how food safety is ensured. So it's definitely not as simple as like tomorrow, let's snap our fingers and take out all the salt. We don't want to do that, and we can't do that. So that's not what's happening. But what the FDA is doing is helping to gradually step it down. And so I think in the future, we're going to be in a much better spot with our sodium intake. We'll be closer to what's called the upper limit. Maybe it's around 2,300 milligrams a day. So that's number one. The other area that I think we'll see progress in, also in large part because of what the FDA is doing, but also because of what industry broadly is doing, is I think we'll see a reduction in sugar consumption. So those are two areas that are on our radar at IFIC. Maybe we'll all be eating more fruits and vegetables. That's my hope. It's not fantasy.
Well, those all sound pretty important, right, in terms of trends. So I'm glad to hear that you're seeing positive trends in the near term, because that will improve people's diets and health outcomes.
There is tremendous interest in how food happens and where food comes from. Never before have we had so few people actually involved in it. In that mixture with the interest is a lot of inaccurate information, a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and even malinformation. I would just say to listeners, regardless of the space that you're in, ask lots of questions, practice curiosity. You don't have to believe everything, especially around food nutrition, because sometimes if it sounds too good to be true, it very well may be true. Go ahead and verify and validate. And one way to do that is you can visit International Food Information Council, or our website is foodinsight.org. We have a lot of content that is reviewed, that is credible about nutrition, food safety, food ingredients, and sustainability.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I've enjoyed the conversation, and talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us today on the latest episode of FoodTech Stories. Be sure and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and keep an eye out for our bi-weekly episodes. I'm your host, Megan Thomas, founder of Ladder 17. FoodTech Stories is edited by TJG Media.